Visa reported earnings after the close. The initial reaction is a gap down. We closed at 351.29. Price is currently trading close to 343, which would put us below the support zone near 345. Now, the question I'd like to answer in this video is Visa a good buy here? Now, to answer that question, I'm going to be using some tools. The first one is our Smarter Earnings Indicator. This is a free indicator. It essentially allows us to turn Thinkorswim into our own database, and I'm going to use 20 years worth of data to understand the earnings patterns inside of Visa. That's the first tool. We're going to use that to understand the patterns inside of Visa. The second tool is going to be to pinpoint the entry for tomorrow, which are going to be our volatility box model, specifically one side. Now let's start with the daily time frame chart here inside of Visa, and I'm going to load in 20 years worth of data just so we can see the most number of data points for the earnings we analyze. Now, if we take a look at this live news story, that gives you an idea of Visa's earnings results. Across the board, we should see they beat estimates, they improved revenue, they grew revenue compared to this time last year, they grew revenue by a decent amount. I think overall, positive earnings cycle. In spite of that, we're seeing price currently what, 342.50. That's what we're currently trading. So I am looking at this as a potential buy. 342.50 actually takes us to the low of this candle, and that's 342. Now, before we do the blind buy, I think it's important to understand the patterns. So let's come back to the 20 years worth of data. And we know that, at least as of right now, it's looking like Visa is going to gap down somewhere in this zone, 345, 342. So that tells me I should be focused on this gap down, trying to see how many times does that gap get filled if we have an earnings beat. Now, over 20 years, we can see that happens 13 out of the 14 gap downs that we've had inside of Visa. So fairly often, we see this gap down getting filled on an earnings beat. So that's a check mark for this idea, a reason I like this idea. The second thing to look at is what happens if we gap down and we continue trending in the bearish direction. That's the gap and goes, and here we can see that happens 9 times. Only 2 of them were on earnings misses, so that implies 7 of them were on earnings beats, which means we can't necessarily rule out the idea of more downside. Now, if we were to shrink this, we were looking at 20 years worth of data. Let's come into just 5 years. This gives us some shorter dated stats, a little bit more of the recency bias. We can see here the gap down fill pattern exists or continues to exist. So 7 out of 7 times gap downs get filled with earnings beats. Gap and goes on the bearish side, we have just 2, both were on earnings beats, and we can see the average bearish move is about $6. Now, if we do open somewhere in this 342.50 zone, the upside is about $8 for a gap fill. Downside, I think you have about this $5, $6 move. If you load in 20 years worth of data, that goes to about $2 if you look at the long-term average. So in both of these scenarios, I really like this gap down getting filled on an earnings beat, especially with the earnings results we see. Now the question is, where and how can we participate in this? Now, as of right now, if you don't trade after hours activity, then you're not really looking at this 342 zone, which is where we're currently trading at right now, and it feels like we might get even a nice bounce after this 342 based off of earnings. If you weren't trading that, then using the volatility box models is what I would be doing. And given that we beat earnings, our bias is on the long side. So that means whenever we cross these orange clouds tomorrow, that's where I'm looking at potentially building this position inside of Visa, both with the daily and the hourly volatility box models. The hourly models will give you ranges throughout the day that you can be looking at for buying, very useful for day trading. And for the swing trade, I'm looking to see if we hit one of our daily models. And if we do hit one of our daily models, then I think that would be a really nice, at least jump up move to try and get this gap fill. Right now, we're seeing prices just breaking down lower. 341.60 is where we're currently at. So let's see what this gap looks like when it's all said and done. But we do know that Visa has a tendency to fill gaps on earnings beats. I hope you found this video helpful for those of you looking for a trade idea for tomorrow and the rest of this week.